What's going on, everyone? Chris Beans here with Bowler's Rant, bringing you part 2 on the USBC approval discussion and FAQ deep dive. Don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button and turn on those notifications. If you haven't seen part 1, check out the link in the video description because we're going to pick up where that left off. And part 2, we're going to start with an issue I saw on social media. So somebody's claiming that somebody used an illegal ball at Nationals. Quote, integrity is so important to the USBC that a Wolverine gets through a check at Nationals and gets used until players bowling notify him that he cannot use it. You cannot make this up. Can someone fact check this for me and let me know if there's any additional context missing here? Because if this is true and the USBC is missing balls and they're getting through and illegal balls are being used, that's just a bad thing. Now, let's move on. There's a lot of points to cover here, so we're going to cover some of the summary points here and then points, the deep dive FAQ points 1 through 7. Points 8 through the rest will be covered in part 3. So they framed the discussion about that there's a manual that governs bowling balls. I don't need to go through all this. You can look that up. Just look up this term, USBC Equipment Certification Manual, and you'll find all the data because that is what I'm referencing here, right? Okay, cool. They're saying the bowling ball approval process is based on trust and good faith. And so summarize, manufacturers submit stuff, they check them, they expect them to make them within the same specification. Okay, cool. USBC only asks for 2 sample balls of each model for approval. This is not always the case because we have shown in the manual, if you are outside of certain measurements on these, certain specifications on these measurements, you know, if you're within a certain, if you're outside of specification on, you know, for example, differential is the big one that comes to mind. I think it's 050 to 061, right? And on new weight blocks, right here, then you would have to submit 8 additional balls. The Storm Spectre is a classic example. It's at an 051, and when it is a new core design, it would fall in that category. Okay, after a ball is approved, process involves verification in the market. That's called spot checking, and we'll get into all that. They said the spot checking was with the Storm Spectre. Okay, cool. We know that. What today's video is about is also the spot checking process of the 6 additional balls that were pulled from the national tournaments, you know, for the national tournament exclusion. And that's what they're talking about. And they're also summarizing that they didn't pull it for the league bowlers because they're saying hardness is not that big of a deal on a typical house shot compared to the professional competitions because of how much hold area you have on a house shot. So that's why they're saying they didn't pull it for local leagues. They're also saying it's unfortunate that this happened during the USBC Open Championships and Masters. So this one I'll spend a quick minute on. The USBC owns this process. It's their process. They are the ones executing this process. This is not an accident. It's deliberate. And it's just bad timing because of poor execution. And they just need to own that. So it's your process, USBC. You just need to own it. And you got to take the good with the bad. USBC rules allow leagues and tournaments to flexibly govern themselves, and what they're really saying here is that some leagues are going to not allow the balls and some will. Which brings us to now the inspection process. We're going to talk about points 1 through 7. Point number 1, what is the current process to approve a ball? We've kind of already talked about this. Manufacturers send quote-unquote 2 balls. There's a little fine print there based on specifications. And then they go through a 13-point inspection, and it takes 5 hours to certify. And if the balls meet specifications and are not close to those limits, no further testing is required. Number 2, do the manufacturers receive their approval data from the SBC? Yes, they get a report. Cool. And I'm going fast because we need to cover the rest of this in a reasonable time limit. Number 3, what is the process used to spot check balls? So this is different than what they do in the lab, right? But what the general premise is they take 4 samples of the chosen ball. If it's close to the limit, they're going to grab an additional 4 samples. And then if the total of those 8 samples predicts nonconformance greater than 0.6%, or any balls found outside of specification, 24 additional balls are tested. And then they estimate the predicted quote-unquote nonconformance percentage using globally accepted statistical calculation methods for quality assessment. Okay, I'd like to see a citation here from the USBC in the best interest of transparency and integrity. If you're going to say that, please provide a link to what these globally accepted methods are so we can all understand them. Number 4, why would the USBC approve a bowling ball and then later remove it from competition? I think this is kind of, self-explanatory. They've got a big, paragraph here, but what they're really saying is that, we expect you to make the balls the same as the samples you sent us. That's reasonable. And they're also saying they don't dictate manufacturing process. That's also reasonable. And they're saying manufacturers know about this and they should build cushion into their process so that if a ball, so that balls don't come out of specification. Because if it does, they're going to pull it. And in short, they're saying if there's more than 5% nonconformance, they're going to pull it from competitions. I think that's fair, except when you pull it. So it's all about the timing. And I think they, quarterly basis, they're, testing all this stuff. Okay, cool. Just don't pull it in the middle of a competition. You can pull it afterwards, beforehand. Cool, but not in the middle of it. I think there should be some consideration for players who spend money and build their arsenals, especially the ones who are not these, professional staffers. The cost is on them and they're being impacted. Okay, number 5. What is the equipment specifications certifications manual? Why is it important? We've kind of talked about this a few times, but they're saying it's a living document, which is part of the problem because they keep moving the goalposts and making more stringent certification requirements for bowling balls, and that's part of the problem. It's just getting hard to make bowling balls, right? But they have a document and it governs this process, and that's what they're talking about. And manufacturers can choose to voluntarily submit equipment for USBC approval and governance according to the manual. Okay, cool. Number 6, USBC test data projects storm balls are outside of specification, but I heard stories of people testing and the affected balls and getting readings over 73D. So now they're going to frame the discussion about how they do it. And what they're saying is they've got a durometer and they have a lab and they use this with the exact same conditions. And they're following some quote unquote guidelines by the American Society for Testing and Materials. Be nice if they provided those guidelines. Again, another citation opportunity. And they regularly calibrate the durometer with the gauge manufacturer internal baseline test to ensure consistency. They're also saying it's temperature controlled and recorded and the positioning stand is used. Okay. And the measurements of the USBC's approval durometer USBC labs are the standard for approval or revocation. So they're framing with that anybody else is doing it might be out of specification, that they are the authority. And there might be a variance of up to 2D based on the calibration or the temperature. And they're also saying they offer manufacturers the opportunity to check their gear, right? Okay, cool. Not the greatest because I think everybody knows how to measure that stuff, but apparently the USBC does it the best. That's kind of what they're saying. Number 7, and this is probably the most important part of this video, which is Storm published a statement stating that their testing has shown many factors, including differences in surface finish, can cause variances, and durometer readings. Does this matter? Okay, there's a lot to cover here, but I'm going to start a little bit backwards, which is they sand the balls. It's my understanding they sand the balls to 500 grit before they test the hardness. USBC testing does confirm that removing surface finish polish by sanding will cause the mouse to measure harder. That's relevant because every single one of these balls is polished at 1500 grit polished. Okay. They're also saying, though, however, even if the manual called for sanding the balls for hardness testing, which it does not, if it doesn't, then why do they do it? That's question number 1. The hardness measurement does not increase enough to bring all samples within specification. I think what they're missing here is if the spot checking process they talked about earlier was 4 balls, another 24 balls, well, that's 32 balls. That would be for each one of these balls, right? So 32 for the Wolverine, for example. They're saying 98% out of specification. Well, were those spot checked or were those sanded and checked? I think we would all like to know what that means. And I think we'd also want to know what were the actual measurements for all 32 balls. This is not a data set. This is a data summary. We would want to see the raw data and all that stuff. And we would also want to see all these other specifications that need to be there. Did they measure that stuff as well? The answer from them might be, well, that's, kind of laborious. And I'm going to say, yes, it's supposed to be difficult. There should be recalcitrance to decertification of balls because once you certify something, there's a monetary impact to the company and there is an impact to the players. Why am I saying that? Well, because of the polish, manufacturers know that the ball's going to be tested out of the box in the field. And so I'm pointing out there might be a discrepancy between how they're doing it in the lab and how they're doing it in the field, and because of the stringent requirements, why some of these things are coming out of specification. That is a plausible argument. So they're going to test them out of the box, and they're also putting on the manufacturer that if they believe that the finishing process will cause variances on the manufacturer to alleviate, right? And even if the surface alone causes the balls to be out of specification, per the manual, the ball will be out of specification and removed. And that's where we get to the issue, right? So I think there's an issue here. We need to think about the process. Now, the last part of this, which is still relevant, probably also the most relevant, USBC stands behind its data and determination. USBC reiterates the statement approved by Storm March 29th. USBC identified the models having a percentage of balls produced below the minimum 73D hardness specification. And you can see these numbers 71, 71, 71, 72, 72, 72, point whatever. So I think this leads to something they're not really saying, which was there was a bad batch of balls. Why am I saying that? The UFO alert, for example, has been out for a while. And it's been fine. I would assume they've been testing it. Maybe they haven't. If they haven't, that's also an issue. But let's assume they have. Give good faith. Well, then if it just found out, that would lead to the idea that maybe there was just a bad batch of balls. Did they need to decertify all the balls? Maybe they just could have grabbed serial numbers and looked at older ones. I don't know. That's possible. But these balls were removed on that. And what I'm arguing is that, if you're going to remove balls and present data, this is not a data set. This is a data summary. They should have a link to the data that everybody can look at and, agree, yes, this makes sense. Because right now there's a lot of distrust of the USBC. So that's what we got for today. We're going to cover the rest of those points in part 3. Let me know what you think. As usual, drop me a comment. Let's continue the conversation. We'll talk more soon. And part 3 is coming tomorrow.